借这个机会介绍一下，很简单的介绍一下这个 Dr. Edgar Mitchell。他有很多成就，我想很简单介绍。他最重要的是，他是第6位在太空月亮上走路的人，登陆的人。那么他最主要是从太空回来的时候，再看到整个地球是那么小，再看到整个宇宙是那么的宽广，突然间他有了一种开悟的经验。所以他回到地球以后不能了解，因为他是一个科学家，他不能从科学的方法来解释他这种经验。那么所以他就创立了一个研究院，专门研究科学与灵性的关系。所以今天跟圣严法师来对话，实在是非常荣幸。我们现在以热烈的掌声欢迎 Dr. Mitchell。我想还是也用这个机会来介绍，圣严法师是世界上第一个创造心灵环保，数十年来一直都在推动提高人的品质，建设人间净土，成为《天下》杂志获为400年来台湾最具影响力的50位人士之一。我们热烈欢迎圣严法师。
Good morning. It does work. Good morning.
So we're going to start the dialogue this morning, and I'm going to ask you and Shen Fashi questions.
Okay.
And then maybe through this dialogue, we can create some sparks. Dr. Mitchell, I think one of the epiphany you have experienced is when you come back from the moon and you experience some earth-shattering, mind-boggling experience. Can you share that in very short time so that maybe Master Sun Yan sort of can respond with the Buddha's point of view?
Yes, it was after the completion of the work on the lunar surface successfully, and we were starting home, and the orientation of the spacecraft coming home was such that we were flying sideways, as it were, and rotating, and that was to keep thermal balance on the spacecraft from the sun, to make sure that the spacecraft was equally heated all around and cooled, and to keep excess heat from building up. But what that allowed to happen was that every 2 minutes as we rotated, this picture of Earth, of the moon, of the sun, and 360 degrees of the heavens was visible in the spacecraft window. And we must point out that in space, because of the lack of the atmosphere to obstruct the vision of the stars, we see the stars when we look as twinkling. But in space, without that atmosphere that causes the twinkling, you see the stars brightly just as they are, and they are 10 times brighter and 10 times more stars than you can possibly see from the highest mountain on Earth on the clearest night. And what this does, as I watched this, it was utterly magnificent. Some of you may have seen some of the recent pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope. What we can see in space with the naked eye is almost what we can see, but not quite at the depth, but almost, it's like what we can see in space just looking with the eye or in our small little telescope that we had. And the universe is so magnificent, so beautiful, that it just defies description. You have to see it to understand it. And I realized from my training at Harvard and MIT in the United States in astronomy, getting my doctorate, I've understood that the molecules of my body and the molecules in the spacecraft and the molecules in my partner's bodies were created in star systems. That's how the matter in our universe is created, the heavy matter. It's made in star systems. And instead of being an intellectual idea for me at that point, it was a visceral idea. It was at the feeling level. It was at the emotional level. That those were my molecules created in an ancient star system. And I was akin to the stars. And it was a feeling of ecstasy and joy to recognize this connection to the whole universe and to feel it in that way. And this experience continued when I wasn't working. I still had work to do, of course, in flying the spacecraft. But when I got a chance to look out the window as we rotated and saw this magnificent panorama of the heavens and the earth, the moon, and the sun, it was just overwhelming, and I felt this joy and ecstasy at being a part of this. And I realized that we humans on Earth, forever, throughout our whole history of evolution from coming up, that we had always asked the questions as we looked into the heavens, that who am I? What is this all about? What's my relationship to all that is? And I thought as this was happening that maybe now that we, the first generation of spacefaring people, to go off our planet and see Earth and the heavens from this different perspective of space, that maybe we ought to re-ask those ancient questions all over again, and from the point of view of being a spacefaring civilization. And I realized that between science, which is a fairly modern development in human understanding, its modern form beginning in the West at least, only about 400 years ago with Sir Isaac Newton and the great thinkers of that period 400 years ago, that a great distinction was made in the 17th century, US count or Western count, in the 17th century by the great thinker, philosopher René Descartes, who came to the conclusion body and mind, physicality and spirituality belong to different realms of reality. Now that served a very noble purpose in the West, because at that point in Western history, the church was persecuting those who disagreed to the point of burning them at the stake for disagreeing with the church. And the Cartesian conclusion that body, mind, physicality, and spirituality were two different things and didn't interact, it caused the Inquisition, which was the police agency of the early church, caused them to quit burning people at the stake for disagreeing with theory, as long as they stayed away from mind, consciousness, and spirituality. Thus, science in the Western world for the last 400 years grew up as a materialist, strictly materialist concept, without any understanding whatsoever of mind, spirituality, or that side of human existence. Until the 20th century and quantum mechanics came along. But that's enough of that story for the moment. As I came back and landed on Earth, I could not understand this ecstasy, this magnificent experience I'd had in space. So I started asking questions about it and reading and found nothing in the science literature that would explain this type of ecstasy. I looked in the religious literature of the West, nothing I could find. And then I got some help from other scholars and started looking in the ancient mystical literature and found in the Sanskrit of ancient India the concept of samadhi. It was called samadhi. And it was the experience of seeing things separately like they are, but experience them internally and at a level of emotion as connected oneness, as unity, and a blissful, ecstatic response to that. And that was the experience. I said, yes, that's exactly what happened in space.
So in other words, you know you are one with everything else.
Yes, that is exactly what came out of it, was a feeling of total unity and oneness with everything that exists.
圣严法师从他的经验来讲，似乎他觉得他跟身边所有宇宙所有的东西合而为一。从佛法观点来讲，这种是不是开悟，或者是开悟的一个过程？请师父开示。
首先呢，我要对这个米切尔博士啊，但是恭喜他。像这样的经验呢，在人类里边呢，大概1000个人不容易找到一个。有一些人呢，有这种经验呢，他们就觉得这是个奇遇啊，就不管它了。那有一些人，也就是说，我们讲有善根，或者是呢有智慧的人呢，有这种经验，因为他是科学家，那从科学角度没有办法来解答的问题，他就觉得这是一个非常新鲜的一个领域，因此就很注意它，就探讨它。那么这种经验呢，刚才你问我他是不是开悟啊？可以说是，也可以说不是。所谓是呢，就是说从人生的一个境界之中啊，在一生过程之中，发生的一种新的经验，而对内心呢产生了新的就是反省呢，可以说这叫开悟。像这种开悟呢，我刚才讲的哈，大概1000个人之中难得有1个人呢。这是问题是在于有的人发生这种经验之后他不管他了，那对他是没有用的，他不是开悟。有的人呢，发生这种经验之后，对他有很多的新的一种想法，或者是呢新的追求、探索，这个时候可以叫做开悟。那我再想回馈太空人呢，就是说在宗教的领域，这是属于说神秘经验的。那么作为科学的领域没办法解释，从哲学的领域来讲，它不是一个理论，它就是一种实际的心理的经验。它这个心理的经验，它是通过眼睛的，也通过身体的。他的心理经验产生之后，对他的身体也有反应。那对于整个的环境来看，他就觉得这个环境跟他是这个是统一的，而不是分离的。像这种经验出现，那可以说这是一种超科学的这是有人经验到了，你不能说他没有这样子的事。可是呢，经验到了，并不等于说每一个人都能看得到，所以这是个人的看到的。那也就是说，太空人他那个时候有6个人呢，6个人之中只有他1个人呢发现了，其他的人没有看到。为什么其他的人看不到？ 如果是以科学的理论来讲的话，一个人看到，应该其他的5个人也应该看到。可是呢，这不是科学，因为这是他自我经验，这是个人的经验。那我曾经呢，有一个学生啊，跟我这个打坐，他打坐了7天之后呢，他在回家的路上呢，他看到的每一棵树、每一根草、每一个人，甚至于每一只小虫，都对他笑，都在欢迎他，都让他感觉到这个世界是那么的美。那他就很快就回来了，他说：“师父，我开悟了。”我说：“你怎么开悟啊？”他就告诉我这样的状况。我说：“这个状况很好，我说恭喜你啊。但是呢，这个状况没有多久你会消失，不会经常在你的经验之中。你等一会儿再出去看草啊、树啊，这些小动物啊和人呢，可能还会对你笑，那个笑的程度没有这么强烈了。”我说：“你这个经验渐渐的会褪色。”他说：“那我想要保存它。”我说：“保存它要继续修行，继续修行。但是继续修行这个不是我们的目的，因为我们的目的，这是修行的目的呢，就是要放空自己。放空自己，这个世界是有还是没有？这个世界对于我们大家来讲都是有。就是有了宗教经验的人来讲，这个宗教经验这样子的心理经验也是有。可是对于佛法的最高境界来讲的话，要把它看成没有，不是说它没有，说经验是有的，但是要把它当成没有，那心里头就不会牵牵挂挂了，这就是一种解脱。
所以佛法所追求的，在这种表面的即使是非常奇异的经验，也需要放下。
是，经验是真的，但是呢，你不要把它当成了这个实在的。世界任何一样东西都是真的，但是呢，都是临时的、暂时的，它会变化，它质和量都会变。既然变，常常在变，那就不是真实。
Dr. Mitchell, is your experience repeatable? And have you re-experienced what you have experienced before, and how often?
Yes, I am able to re-experience that. But as Master Ching has said, I'm a meditator. I practice my meditation. And I have learned to repeat the experience by going to deep meditation. And I do know the practice of emptiness and getting to that place where not only you can have the experience, but it is meaningful to you. And using my thought after this was to begin to use the tools of science, because science has produced in a short period of time the greatest explosion of knowledge of how nature works that we've had. So I wanted to use the tools of science to help understand and deepen these experiences. And fortunately, I have come in contact with many great Buddhist thinkers and practitioners, and they have taught me along the way too of much of what we're talking about here.
As an explorer of both science and human consciousness frontier,
yes.
You have demonstrated or have discovered many of the fundamental assumptions of modern physics are not quite as they are stated. For example, the Big Bang hypothesis. Would you?
Well, I think science is based upon evidence and validating theory with evidence. And I am of the opinion that the Big Bang, while it has been primary theory for almost 100 years now, it is on its way out, that the evidence that is coming out of this new rework we have been doing will show us that that's not the final answer to how the universe arose. that likely the universe is continuously creating matter and continuously arising and continuously going out of existence, just like everything else.
So as a consequence, by eliminating the Big Bang assumption, the time no longer starts from zero at the Big Bang. In fact, the time has no beginning and no end. Is that true?
Well, to me, time, we're getting into some technical talk, and that's fine. Time is a local measure. We create the measure of time right here on Earth in our own presence. Nature itself only knows process and sequence. It doesn't measure. It's our measurement, it's our desire to know and to understand a finite process that causes us to create time as a measure. So for example, the process that our time is based upon is our Earth moving around our sun and our Earth spinning on its axis. So we created a measure of that, and we call the Earth movement around one revolution, that's a day. And we've broken that down now into other measures of time. And the measure of the Earth going around the sun is a year. So our measure of time is perfectly arbitrary. If we were to go to Mars or someplace else, you would have to have a different measure of time.
圣严师父，那么actually you made a major statement just now, right? 他才做了一个讲话，就是说这个大爆炸是不存在。而他从最新的科学来讲，他是在宇宙是永远永远的在创造，而时间基本上是无始无终。那是不是从个观点来讲是请师父开示一下这个华严世界是不是这种景象？
我很佩服这位太空人呢，他能够突破。一般的人到现在为止，大家认为宇宙的产生这是大爆炸那他的观念呢，就是说乘除坏空，它永远不断的在动的那这个就是跟佛法是相应的。那我想要跟太空人分享的就是说，这个佛教就是佛法上讲的这个。宇宙它是时间跟空间的相加，没有空间就是没有时间，所以时间就是过去、现在、未来，空间就是四方和上下但是呢，所以时间这样东西有没有？没有这样的东西。那空间这样东西有没有？没有这样东西。时间是有一个空间的位置在移动，所以它的计量计算是时间来的。那时间是不是真的有呢？时间如果有空间的这个感受，或感受这个空间在动，那就时间是有的。如果不感受到空间是在动，这个时间不存在。宇宙就是时间跟空间的是相加或者是配合。那空间为什么也是没有呢？如果没有感觉到有时间的话，空间的动也不存在，那就是空的。因此呢，刚才这个太空人他就讲到，就是他相信宇宙不是大爆炸，而是呢是什么呢？它永远的继续不断的成、住、坏、空这个四种状态形成宇宙。那谁感受到这个宇宙呢？是众生，特别是众生里边的人感受到，其他的众生没有知识，不知道。人感受到这个宇宙它是有时间有空间的。那有时间有空间就是一个 宇宙，宇宙可以大可以小。刚才这个于教授问，跟华严这个世界有什么关系吗？有。宇宙呢，从华严来讲的话，它可以大，可以小，小到没有，这是至小无内，就是最小的是没有内的，也就是它没有东西。至大无外，最大的没有外的，也就是说它没有边际。至小无内，至大无外。因此呢，这个在这个《华严经》里边呢，有讲到啊，30诸佛可以在一粒沙子上转大法轮，说法度众生。那在《楞严经》里边有讲的，也讲到了，就是30诸佛在一个这个头发的发尖上面呢转大法轮。这个奇怪，怎么可能？还有《华严经》里的境界是说，须弥能够拿戒指，大家听得懂的。须弥山里边装一个戒指，戒指很小了，戒彩纸是很小的一个物体，它里边可以装下须弥山，这个就听不懂了。这个华严的世界就是说，大的容纳小的。小的容纳大的，小的可以单独的成立，它是一个宇宙；大的可以容纳许多无量无数的宇宙，是这样子。无量无数的宇宙是假的，不是真的这个存在，因为经常它是成住外空，它在变化。
What the Master Sheng Yen talk about is the reality of the universe. From the Buddha Sutras.
Yes.
How would you explain it from the frontier of science?
Well, certainly the various interpretations that he speaks exist in science also. However, I take the point of view, the science point of view that I work with, starts with one thing. We said it can be nothing. That everything can be nothing. But I start with the notion, above my head, that hurts. So there is something. If it hurts, there is something. So let's start with that premise, that there is something, because if you hit your head on it, it hurts. Now, absolutely, it's the relationship of all of these things that science is about, and finding ways to describe all of these movements and motions. And when we look through our telescope and look out beyond Earth, we see all of these heavenly bodies. And we can start to, and particularly in the century we have just been through, the 20th century has been the century of the greatest discovery of these, let's call it visions, because we haven't bumped our heads on the stars yet, although we got kind of close going to the moon. So trying to find a system of thought that results in measure, that's what science is about. And finding a way to make these measures consistent with each other so that we can create an experiment to validate what our thought is. And that is what modern science is about. And so one of the things that has happened just in the 20th century that helped bring the end to the Cartesian duality, that body, mind, physicality, spirituality are two separate things, was this realm of quantum physics that's only been discovered in the 20th century. And it showed that mind matter does interact, and that we're starting to understand how it interacts. And that is what my area has been now for the last 30 years, is learning to use the tools of science, and particularly the tools of quantum physics, to explore some of these mental, spiritual realms within the framework that science has used. And I will say we have been quite successful as far as we've gone. Have we got all the answers? No, by no means. We can't really prove the Big Bang is wrong yet, but we're getting there. But the whole series of new thinking and new theory that is arising from this new work and from going off the earth and looking back, and some new things that are now coming in physics, place an interpretation. Now that's where we are. Our only differences here are in interpretation of what is the meaning of some of these things that we observe.
In the science, when we don't know anything, what we try to do is to create a model of it.
That's right.
So what Master Sun Yan talked about in the universe according to Huayan Sutra, can that be modeled with quantum hologram?
That is what we're trying to do, absolutely. And the thing that the modern thought has added to the previous thought is the power of information. Now, we talk about energy, and I'm sure you talk about energy in Buddhism. Certainly, energy in science is vital. And we say that energy, existence is based upon energy, and matter is just dense energy. So matter is energy, but compressed to where we can bump our head and it hurts. Information is how we know anything at all. Information, the ability to utilize information is intelligence. That's a definition. We define intelligence as the ability to utilize information. Now, and information is just patterns of energy. Patterns of energy. We look into the heavens and we see the star system called the Big Dipper. Well, that's a pattern of energy. We give it a name, the Big Dipper. But it's just a pattern of energy, so that's information. So the theory that we're building up, the model that we're building up in science at this point, is based around that idea that matter is just compressed energy, and that information is patterns of energy. And the ability to use it, that's consciousness. Being aware of it, that's consciousness. And building up from that very basis from the model in science, it shows and it touches on most everything that's being talked about here. We just have a few different words that we're using to say it.
科学跟佛学这个是名词应该是不大相同的啊，它的内容可以有交集点，但是呢，我相信啊，科学呢永远没有办法理解到佛法的最高层次，因为什么呢？最高层次是离言的，也就是心行处密，离言说相，那也就是说没有语言文字可以做表达的。既然如此，科学就没有办法来解决这个问题。我只是想回应一下。但是呢，在某一种程度的时候，科学也可以帮助佛学的那个使得我们大众啊可以适用的，这是非常有利的。我不否定科学，但是科学要是完全能够解释或者是分析佛学的层次的话，这比较不容易。因为禅宗讲的就是心行处密啊，就是讲的不离文字，离语言，就是不可思议、不可思、不可议、不可思用思想，不可用语言。那这怎么能用科学来处理呢？来解决呢？但是我还是觉得肯定科学，因为昌明呢对佛法的帮助越大。
1 second answer. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. We're touching on so much of the same thing. And of course, in science, for example, we know things are beautiful, but I don't have a way to write an equation for what is beautiful. But nevertheless, I can agree for myself as a human being, conscious human being, that is beautiful, that it is warm, that it is lovely. Now, warm, see, I can do in science. I can measure temperature and put a number to it. But we don't yet have a way to say, I'm happy and put a number to it, or I'm peaceful and put a number to it. That is where we have to go. And to me, the ultimate challenge in science at this moment is you touched upon. We really do not know what happens to this awareness when life ceases at the end of life. And I know the concepts of consciousness existing after death and reincarnation, and those are important concepts that are right on the frontier that science has not yet been able to get a hold on, but we're getting close.
Maybe we can just take a minute to sort of summarize what you think of this first half.
I think that we're very productive dialogue, and I think most of what we're saying is just slightly different words and interpretations as we deal with the phenomenon. Now, it's rather clear that as a scientist, I am more interested in the nature of matter, wherein most traditional idealists thought it's the consciousness is that fundamental. And so my point is putting matter and consciousness into the same relationship so that we can see the relationship of how they fit in a better way. Of course, that's what science is, a materialist concept, and has been for 400 years, trying now to integrate the more ephemeral spiritual ideas so that they in juxtaposition, that's tough. But I think we're doing a pretty good job.
Well, it seems to me that both of you really have talked very, very close to each other, although you cannot say from the scientific point of view, you can validate.
Yeah.
You know, like what you said, you can't really write an equation for beauty.
Yeah.
But you know, when you see a beauty, you know it is.
You know it's there. Exactly right.
In this second half, we are going to sort of begin to explore the human consciousness,
Okay.
which is something that you have created an institute to explore that for the last 30 years.
That's right. There's a lot of new ideas we haven't yet explored, and I'll be pleased to share with our audience and with Master Ching. And it has to do with bringing the quantum world into the dialogue.
And I think that will have to do a lot with, for example, the notion of intention. And
we're getting attention and intention into it is pretty fundamental, because there's been experimental evidence with this.
I guess you made a major statement in the early half in saying that the Big Bang is on its way out.
Well, I hope that's more than a personal opinion, but there seem to be quite a few scientists now that are starting to being willing to challenge the Big Bang as a right idea. I've been one that's been challenging it for some time, and others are now seeing the evidence and wanting to challenge it. It'll probably be another decade or two before all of academia turns loose, but I think they will in due course.
Well, I think it's hard for modern physicists who spend their lifetime working on the basis of Big Bang to suddenly abandon it, right?
Well, most of the evidence used to establish or to validate the Big Bang can be validated for the alternative just as well, and that's background radiation and that sort of thing. It's the same. That's valid, but you don't have to have the Big Bang to create that.
We haven't talked about, but probably we will talk about in the second half, is the Einstein's assumption that the speed of light is the absolute limit. You have any comment on that?
Yeah, that's not. It turns out, sorry, Dr. Einstein, that's not true.
Well,
Well, this whole process of quantum non-locality, which indicates that signals do go faster than the speed of light, and it's still a murky area, but quantum non-locality has been demonstrated in the laboratory over and over again, so it's a valid concept. And that means that these quantum relationships are instantaneous. Now, we don't know although the theoretical work says that non-locality is instantaneous for an infinite space, we can't really say that. We know that I have personally done an ESP experiment to the moon, so we know it's at least 240,000 miles. But whether the theory would say it's infinite, well, infinite's big. That's really big. And that hasn't been demonstrated. But nevertheless, that's what the theoretical structure shows.